to the Ignorance Podcast. Thank you so much for listening this year to my first season where we interviewed 9 scientists. Today, for the end of year episode, we are going to do something special where I will be the guest for today and I'll be interviewed by a special guest. Thank you so much for all your support, and I look forward to continuing this project in the new year with you. And if you have any suggestions or comments, please share them with me in my email. Happy New Year, happy holidays. Thank you for listening. And please share this with one other person if you can.
I'm filling in for Mayla Boguslav, and I research researchers. As filling in for a researcher, I get this incredible opportunity to advance science and knowledge, and I do not take that lightly. Taxpayers like you fund research, so we owe it to you and ourselves to ensure you can access and understand our new knowledge and findings. Welcome to the Ignorance Podcast, where we learn about current questions in research. I live by the motto, ignorance is bliss, because when you don't know something, it's an opportunity to learn. Let's welcome our guest researcher for today. Please introduce yourself by name only and your favorite thing to do outside of work.
I'm Mayla Boguslav, and one of my favorite things to do outside of work is be outside. I love skiing, hiking, biking, anything outside. And then the other one I also love is dancing. It really gets me out of my head.
Why is it important to get out of your head?
It's important to get out of your head because when you work in creative spaces like research, a lot of times you can sit at a desk for hours and feel like you're getting nothing done. And having that break allows your brain in the background to work through the ideas. And so a lot of times when I'm not working and I'm outside or dancing, I really get lots of good ideas and I'm able to be refreshed when I sit back down and reset on the creative process.
What questions excite you in your work? What questions are you currently pursuing?
The big overarching question I think about is, how do I help people achieve their goals? And I think about that in a few different ways. In my current job, the big way I think about that is around collaborations. How do I help people collaborate better for more impact and better research? And I think about this in a research context because, as Josh said, I research researchers. How do I help researchers do better at their job to get the science out to the world?
How do you hope to impact the world?
I hope to impact the world in a few different ways. One, I really hope to make science and research at large more accessible and transparent. And I hope by doing that, it also makes it more efficient. If researchers cannot explain their science and research to the world, then I understand why people don't trust us. Researchers think there needs to be this blind trust on what we're doing and that people should just listen to us. But if we can explain it and they can't understand it, why are they supposed to trust us? As the intro said, this is all taxpayer money that's funding a lot of this research, and so they deserve to know what's happening. And other things that feel really unexplainable. And so another big piece I think about is self-evaluation. And I want to be able to help people understand that they're making progress. I think we don't learn how to self-evaluate, and that's really problematic because we're supposed to get better and better at whatever we're doing. And how can we do that if we don't know where we are in the process? And in general, in my job, thinking about how do I help people achieve their goals, I hope, people achieve their goals better, faster, more efficient in all of those ways. And that research is really able to make it out to the world and be useful to real people like my listeners and, me and Josh as well.
Can you elaborate on why science is not accessible and transparent right now?
Good question. I think science and research is not super transparent right now because it's really complex and researchers think it's really complex. For me, this became really clear over COVID when, there was so much information out there and it felt like everything was changing constantly. And people, just general people, didn't know what to do with that. And each time it felt like, the researchers were saying, here's what you should be doing. And then, months later it would change. And as a researcher, I understand that, as we learn new things shift. But just as a general person, I don't think that's as obvious. And so nowadays, with the access of basically everything, everyone wants to do their own research. There's no need to really listen to an expert. This idea of what an expert really means is more complicated. And I think a lot of things have also become more politicized, right? Vaccines, COVID, autism, like anything. around research has really become so much more politicized. In general, research is really meant to be agnostic to an answer. It's just supposed to tell you what is. And sometimes what is contradicts what the world is doing and what's making money. And I think that's the other reason why a lot of things don't get put out there in terms of research. So a good example of that is smoking. For a long time, it actually became clear that smoking was not good for you. And yet cigarettes and all the new stuff out there is still super prevalent. And even more funnily, a lot of doctors smoke when they explicitly know it's terrible for them. And so even if people can access the science, this idea of really applying it to their lives doesn't always even happen. Because it's not just about knowing information, it's about understanding why it matters to you. And I think as a society, and especially as researchers, we're really not good at getting at why it matters. We think that if you know the information, that is enough. And we all know that's not true.
Who has influenced you? Who are people you look up to?
So this is actually one of my favorite questions for my podcast. And I would say most of the people I have interviewed on my podcast are those people. It's included my advisor from grad school. It's included another committee member from grad school. It's included some people from my postdoc. It's included numerous people who have really influenced me and changed how I think about the world, especially in research. The people who I guess have not really been mentioned on my podcast are people before I got my PhD. Right. So in high school, there were amazing math teachers that really influenced me in helping me think deeply about a problem and really enjoy mathematics. It was amazing. Two teachers specifically in high school. And then in college, there are a number of people who also really influenced me. My first year math professor was awesome. And walked in front of the room of all of us at Columbia University and was like, I thought you guys were all the cream of the crop when we all super failed the first exam ever in our career of undergrad. And I got to know him really well through office hours over that whole year. And he was an amazing professor and really taught me how to learn. Another one from high school is my chemistry teacher, really taught me how to learn as well. In general, I love the teachers that are really difficult because for me, it forces me to really understand how I learn and puts the onus on me to actually do that. And then on top of that, on the other side, I also have some philosophy background, and a lot of my philosophy professors I also really love because they really taught me how to think deeply about the world as a whole.
That's awesome that you've been able to interview so many of the people that you look up to. How do you know if you've been successful at your work as a researcher?
Yeah, so because I study self-evaluation, I think about this criteria a lot, and I don't know that I have it exactly down, but I think I'm starting to see projects that I've influenced in terms of this collaboration piece really come to fruition really beautifully, and also getting comments back on both kind of an outcomes report and also just anecdotally where people really found this super, super valuable. A lot of what I want to do is help create these evaluations that showcases my value in my job because it's not exactly clear yet, right? How I help, a group of researchers work together may at the end of the day influence a paper they wrote or a publication they have or a grant that they go for or a presentation, but it's actually really hard to show that correlation. And I don't think that's exactly what I want to show anyways. I think there's many more pieces of the process. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do now is kind of write down what is the actual research process and be able to track over time how I'm helping in those specific ways. A lot of my evaluation criteria is that the customer, the clients that I'm working with are really satisfied at the end of the day of what they're doing and that their projects are really going far and making a huge difference.
What has been your most surprising result?
The first thing that popped into my head was actually something in graduate school. I was working on a problem of mapping concepts to vocabularies. That one of the big things that allows us to work together from different fields or different disciplines is if we have the same language. If I'm coming here to a space where I don't have the same language as somebody else, if I say the word table, it could mean in an architecture sense a physical table, but in a mathematical sense or a data science sense, it could be a table in Excel, for example. And so it really matters that we're all speaking the same language or at least understanding what we're saying in that way, even if we have different words for it. And so a lot of the beginning of my PhD was focused on how do we ensure that the language that's being used in biomedical papers is really mapped to the correct concepts that then people can use down the line for other work. It's actually a really hard problem to map language for exactly kind of what I just said, that the word table is ambiguous, and then the other one is variability, that there's many different ways to say the same thing, such as street and road basically mean the same thing. And so it was a really interesting problem to work on. Language is one of my favorite things because it's really this combination of mathematics and philosophy in my mind. There's two pieces to this project of trying to map concepts. One is identifying what are the concepts in the actual language and then mapping that to some vocabulary. And on that second half of mapping whatever text I found to a vocabulary, we actually were able to do this on a character by character level, thinking about kind of the textual level, so the word table, let's say, mapping it to an ID. So it'd say like, two letters that signified a vocabulary set, and then a bunch of numbers, right? Just like a regular old ID that shouldn't have any meaning at all. And crazily, thinking about those both as languages, as if I'm kind of translating between them, actually worked pretty well. Meaning that there has to be some meaning in those identifiers, because we did some experiments to showcase that there is some meaning in it. You can't just randomize it and it works. And so that was a really big surprise. And what made it even more surprising is it meant that it could generate random characters, like characters that didn't exist. So it could generate IDs that weren't real IDs. And the question is that a real error? Like, what do you do with that? And I think that was always really surprising to me in this question of, so what do you do? Right? I think this is now a question with AI that technically it could generate things that don't exactly make sense. And what are you supposed to do with that is not exactly clear. People put things together all the time that don't seem to make any sense and then eventually get meaning. And so what does that mean, right, in this context? And I think it was just really surprising that at the end of the day, almost everything has some meaning. And I think it's because humans are touching it in some way. And we had some theories about why, like what the meaning was in that pattern. But when a human touches something, it's very hard to not put meaning into it. It's very hard to not put a pattern even accidentally into something because you don't really know how it relates to something bigger, but it's within itself going to mean something, even if it's not meant to at the end of the day.
Yeah, language is fascinating. And I agree. A lot of our disagreements and miscommunications today come down to simply different usages of language that we don't identify and clarify when we should.
Yeah, and so I realized actually that all along I've been doing it for the job I have now, in that I've been thinking a lot about language. I've been thinking about like how do we do science? How do we find a good question? And now I think about how do we find a good collaboration? And now I can just think more broadly about the research process. And so all of it totally relates to we need to ensure we have a good base before we try to solve the problem. And that's for sure what mathematics taught me, that 50% of it is understanding what's the problem you're even trying to solve, and that includes making sure you understand the language and that you're sharing a common language before you try to get at solutions of any sort.
What is your favorite disagreement?
In general, I love controversial topics, and I love talking about them. I love learning from them. I've had conversations with people who are anti-vaccines. I've had conversations with people who are Trumpsters. I've had conversations with people who are anti-Zionist. I really enjoy talking to people who are very different than me and have different views than me, because I learn a lot every single time, whether or not the goal is to convince each other, which generally it can't be if you want to have a real good conversation. I really enjoy all of those disagreements because there are values to both sides, right? Vaccines aren't all good. Trump isn't all bad. I think everything's a much more complex issue, and having room for disagreements and conversations about disagreements is quite important. Because I think in general, I'm a really open person to almost any idea. I'm not super closed off. I don't have strong opinions about most things, which I think is really important in a researcher, because you don't want to be blinded by a bias that you may have. You really want to listen to the data and look for everything, not just one specific thing. And so I think as a whole, I just exist in a disagreement world.
Has there been a disagreement that you haven't liked or has struck you really the wrong way?
I think a lot of times conversations end for me when it feels like it's ridiculous. So, with vaccines, when people go off the rails and talk about how it's changing your DNA, there's like very strong evidence that's not true. I think that's when I stop conversations. But until then, I generally am able to have most disagreement conversations.
If you could do anything not limited by grants or other factors in your space, what would you be doing? What is your vision for the world?
So a lot of what I'd be doing is what I'm doing now. I would just want to be paid more, to be honest. Who doesn't want to be paid more in this world? And everything's getting quite expensive. But really, at the end of the day, my big goal is to start my own institute called the Ignorance Institute. And this podcast is really that first stamp of that, where I really think that there's three things that need to work together to do good research. You need the research itself, you need education, and you need community engagement. And all three need to work together to really be able to both learn new things and also apply those new things. And so education is necessary for people who want to be researchers, but also just for general public, right? I think there's some base level of knowledge that is necessary for somebody to be in the world. And are we getting that right now? Is it enough? I don't necessarily know that I have the answer at this moment, but I think we really need to think deeply about that question of what is the base level of education that everyone needs to really be a thriving citizen today in this world. And I don't think we've successfully done that. See everything with artificial intelligence at this point and the many things that are going on around what is the training that people need now for AI in the workforce. On the research side, we obviously need research. I think very deeply about research, and so I think I have a lot of opinions on that. Community engagement is critical because if you have the education, you have the research, but if you're not actually talking to the communities who need the information, who are influenced by the information, you're dead on the water. You really need to ensure that everything that you're doing is really valuable to specific people that will actually be used. Because on some level, like there's physics for poets, right? If you're an English major and you say you need to take science, like college courses say that you need to take science, they try to make it easier for people who may not have that scientific mind. But there's no poetry for physicists. It doesn't work the other way. And it's always baffled me. And the answer I've come to is that it's really important as anyone in this world to be able to communicate your ideas. If you major in humanities, a lot of the focus is on communication, and that's just less true in the sciences. And so I'm actually really grateful for all the humanities and communication education I got. And a lot of my PhD, I learned how to write in a scientific way, how to really communicate my ideas. And if we can't communicate our ideas to a general audience, or at least to the people who really need the information, what's the point of researching it? Because who cares, right? Who cares about somebody just sitting in their office thinking about something? And that's not to say anything bad about basic research. There's many mathematics problems that were solved hundreds of years ago that have now been huge and made a huge difference. Artificial intelligence is a great example where a lot of the mathematics was from the 1980s, but took until in this new century, in the 2000s, to be able to really implement it because of hardware and software. And so, just because something seems really not relevant doesn't mean it won't be relevant later. But it's really important that that information gets to the right place so people can discover that it's actually relevant later. And I don't know that we do a great job of that either. And so I really want to start this Ignorance Institute that tries to think about all of those three things and how they really all need to connect. And then the ignorance piece, really, in this podcast and both in the Institute, is this idea of really focusing on the question and focusing on that ignorance is bliss. That when I don't know something, it really is an opportunity to learn and really leaning into that curiosity and learning into what is the best way to do something. We may not know the answer yet, and we need to be searching, right? We need to be curious and we need to be open to the fact that there may be new things in general. So that's really what I would do is start this institute, continue this podcast, talk to more scientists, researchers more, and really just build a world that is open and curious and excited about ideas and really can actually harness them and use them for good.
Please introduce yourself with your job title and field.
My name is Mayla Boguslav, and my job title is a research associate at the Southern California Clinical and Translational Science Institute. I work at an institute that aims to create infrastructure around research. So it thinks about kind of this question of what is the best way to do research and how can we support researchers in that. And it's more and more leaning towards actually researching that too. And so I sit in a really nice space where I get to work with many different types of disciplines to help researchers collaborate better and think about their science in a really amazing way to have more impact on the world and to really apply out their research. And so the Institute, not just as an infrastructure institute, it also really thinks about this impact piece, really trying to ensure the research that we are doing makes it out to real people and makes a real difference for those people. My background is in mathematics, philosophy, and pre-med. My PhD is in computational biosciences with a focus on natural language processing, and I would argue philosophy with thinking about questions. And currently, I study the science of team science, and I'll be moving more towards translational science, which is really kind of the science of science plus impact for researching researchers, as I say in this podcast. And I will pass it to my husband, Josh, who is my co producer of this podcast and editor.
I'm Joshua Mendel. I'm the co producer and editor of this podcast. I love hearing about researching researchers, and I am currently studying to be a rabbi at American Jewish University in Los Angeles.
This podcast is hosted by me, Mayla Boguslav, and produced and edited by Joshua Mendel. To learn more about this episode's guest and any cited or named people, take a look at the episode description. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ignorance Podcast. Please follow the Ignorance Podcast wherever you get your podcasts to learn about science through research questions.
Why is it important to get out of your head?
It's important to get out of your head because... Good question. It's harder on the other side.